Good afternoon, everyone. I am Linda Sablehouse, your REL Mid-Atlantic host. I would like to welcome you to the Root Cause Analysis webinar hosted by the Regional Educational Laboratory for the Mid-Atlantic region. Before we get started, I would like to go over some features of the room that you'll be using during this webinar. On the left of your screen, you will see a question box. Please use this box for any content-related questions or comments that you may have during the session. We will do our best to address all questions during the presentation or during Q&A. At the top right corner of your screen, you will see a closed captioning box. This box is interactive, allowing you to change the text size and color. You can also roll up the box to see more of the text. Just click the arrow that is shown circled in red on this slide. In the resource box, located just below the closed captioning box, you'll find multiple handouts that you can download. Just highlight the document and click Download Files. At the bottom right corner of your screen, you will find the Technical Solutions box. If you're having any difficulties viewing the presentation or with the sound, please try the solutions listed in this box. If you're still having a problem, feel free to contact us by email, which is provided under Contact Us, and we will work with you to try and resolve your issue. Throughout this webinar, we will be asking you to participate in some polls. For the Q&A portion of the webinar, we will bring out a discussion box for you to type in your specific questions and comments. We will do this several times throughout the webinar. At the end of the webinar, the presenter will send you to our evaluation survey. It will open up in a new web browser page. If you have to leave early, you can be taken to our survey by highlighting Evaluation in the web link box and then click the Browse To button. And at the end of the survey, you'll have an option to print a certificate of attendance. Now we would like to give you a brief overview of the REL. Our primary mission is to help educators access and use high-quality research to make evidence-based decisions that can lead to improved student outcomes. We conduct research and provide professional development resources like the Root Cause Analysis webinar. While we primarily serve education stakeholders in Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and the District of Columbia, our professional development events are open to everyone, so be sure to tell your colleagues about us. You will also have an opportunity to continue this conversation long after the webinar has ended using our REL Mid-Atlantic online forum. Now I would like to turn the webinar over to our facilitator, Teresa Duncan, Director of the REL Mid-Atlantic. Teresa?
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar. I am very pleased to be serving as facilitator to this webinar, and I think that we'll all learn a lot, and this will be a very fruitful presentation and discussion. Let me do a brief overview of what we'll be covering today. I'll welcome our presenter, who will then go into her presentation. We have several polls planned, and so it'll be a little bit more interactive, and please do feel free to use the question box on the left-hand side at any time, and what I'll do is I will feed those questions to Ronnie as she goes along. I wanted to say a few words about the genesis of this webinar. We invited Ronnie to do this webinar. She also presented the same webinar back in April because I had attended a similar presentation she had made at the Mid-Atlantic Equity Center's annual conference last year. And I thought this was a great topic, something that deserved a wider audience, and given our very positive feedback from our April webinar, I think that was the right decision. And so we're very glad that Ronnie is able to do this command performance, if you will, and so I think that we'll learn a lot. The thing that really I feel is very important about this root cause analysis topic is that it is a a way for educators to engage with data in a way that doesn't require heavy statistical knowledge. It is you're not expected to be a research analyst who can run SPSS or SAS. This is really a way of engaging data that most schools have, and I think that most of us will agree that schools tend to be data rich but analysis poor. And so root cause analysis is a good entry point into digging into those data and thinking through what might be causing those patterns that we're observing. And so this is not an impact analysis like the Institute for Education Sciences would use the term impact, but I think it is an important entry point into engaging in fruitful discussions about educational data and bringing educators and practitioners to the table to discuss data. So this is really what I feel to be data-driven decision-making at its essence. So with that long intro, let me please welcome Ronnie Silverstein. She is currently principal at Falls Mead Elementary School at Montgomery County Public Schools in Maryland. She is a veteran educator. She has 4 decades of teaching experience under her belt. She has been a special education teacher, coordinator for special education. She's been principal for many years. She's also been director of elementary leadership for Montgomery County Public Schools. And so she is a veteran staff developer and has engaged in root cause analysis with her leadership teams for years now. And also joining us in the discussion is Jeff Hewitt, who is a principal at Lambertville Public School in New Jersey. Thank you, Jeff, for joining us. He will share his experiences with using root cause analysis as well. So he and Ronnie will be doing some back and forth and talking about their uses of this particular strategy. So with that introduction, I will turn it over to Ronnie. Oh, I'm sorry, one more thing. If you look to the right side of your screen, there is a box called Resources, and so the PowerPoint slides and additional materials, various articles and sample documents are there for you to download. If you click on all of them, they all get downloaded into a zip file, so everything is there for your convenience. And with that, I promise now to turn it over to Ronnie. Ronnie?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I actually used to think that I would call this presentation Data Rich and Analysis Poor, so that was a perfect intro for me. Hi, Jeff. Are you there?
I am. Good afternoon. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
So the purpose today, as Teresa told you, is to really look at how we as leaders can use root cause analysis to solve student achievement needs. All too often, we solve the wrong problem. So we're going to delve into just some various ways that you can do this. Without any further ado, I'm glad that a lot of you checked in with us. But if you could just complete this quick poll, I would appreciate it. Are you a teacher, school administrator, district administrator, researcher, etc., so that we all can see together who's here with us today. While you do that, I'm going to move on. Need the poll off of the screen. Thanks. So what is root cause analysis? It's tracing a problem to its origin rather than just looking quickly at data and making sure or making up our mind of what we should solve. root cause is really taking it down to the origin. It's not a new concept or procedure. It arose in the 1950s as a formal study used by NASA, as a matter of fact, when they had limitations in their rocket design. Later on, a little later on, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Resources really started using it for to analyze serious adverse effects in medicine. And it always, root cause analysis always follows a specified protocol. It always begins with data collection, questioning, participant interviews, etc. And it really prevents us from treating the symptoms rather than the problem. Now, root cause analysis is used in medicine, space, industry, engineering, science, and education. I really liked James Rooney and Lee Van Heuvel's statement that school improvement efforts are targeted more accurately because root cause is a tool designed to help identify not only the what and the how of an event, but why it happened. Only when you can identify why this failure is occurring will you be able to really find that correction. So that's just a little bit of background about root cause, and we're going to delve into, okay, so then how do I use it in my work? Most always in a school, schools will engage in root cause analysis to help them create their school improvement plan. That's what we use it for, and we use it as an update to help us with our school improvement plan. And so what is the process that you use currently, if you do use it, to develop your school improvement plan? You can see there that you can choose your administration writes it, the leadership team writes it, one teacher is in charge of updating the plan, or you might have some other, and you can write your other in that little answer box.
You want me to explain what we do at our school, Ronnie, while they're filling that out? Or
Yes, thank you.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So basically here in Lambertville, what we do is we gather a lot of information from key stakeholders, from staff members, from community members are welcome to provide input as well, parents. We also actually survey our students in the upper grades. We're a kindergarten through 6th grade building, so we'll survey the 3rd through 6th graders as well to kind of get their feedback and input. And then we have a committee of staff members that get together and they review all of that data, and we share it together, we analyze that data, and then from that we sort of target different areas that we want to focus on and come up with an action plan to put into writing that we then share back to the whole staff at a faculty meeting or something, and it goes in writing, and we continue to revisit it throughout the school year at different faculty meetings, morning meetings, and team meetings, and things like that. But constantly getting feedback from those stakeholders as well, and that sometimes is informal as well as more formally, and it's the more formal information that we really look to analyze more closely.
That's great. So when you survey the students, are you asking them specifically about some particular problem that you see, or do you have a general question that you ask them?
We do. We have more of a, somewhat of a checklist, but then they also have the opportunity to input just more of an open-ended response to some of it's cultural, to see how they feel about the school, but then also to see how they feel about themselves as learners, how they learn best, some of the things that they may feel they struggle with in class, as opposed to things that they really excel with. So we really try to get a picture of them as learners, but also get a feel for the culture of the building at the same time.
Excellent. Okay. So I see in our audience, Jeff, that about 62% of the people who have responded have the leadership team writing the plan, which is great. You need many stakeholders. And about 18.9 or 19% of the administrators apparently are writing the plan, which really doesn't allow for the process that we're talking about. Now, it's possible that an administrator could write the plan after doing the root cause analysis, so that could happen, but it really should be a very collaborative process, just as Jeff has described.
And can I just
So-
add too, I just wanted to say, as I sit as part of that team that does analyze the data, and
Right.
we're each equal members of that team, and we split that information up amongst ourselves, and then we come back together and we share out the sections that we've analyzed, and then together we formulate our goals moving forward.
Right, right. We do something similar, and we have our grade level team leaders come together, a representative of special ed. The specialists are represented. ESOL is there. We have parents on the team. We have a para-educator, at least one. Our staff development specialist, our reading specialist, counselor. We don't have a student at this time, but we, like Jeff, we surveyed our students this year. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we actually tweaked our school improvement plan based on some of the survey data from the students. So it is important to mobilize a whole team to do this work. So thank you for that poll. We're going to go on. So the essential question for today is, why is root cause analysis a key to effective instructional leadership? And the reason is that a leader, as you all know, is key to school improvement. But school improvement is an adaptive challenge, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. But an adaptive challenge is a challenge that we really don't know the answer to. All improvement involves change and new learning, especially when you're talking about a challenge that doesn't have an easy answer. And teachers are the actual instructional decision makers, so they have to be a part of this process because they're in the trenches. They're the ones making the decisions for the students. And as I said, collaboration is so powerful. Data is just the beginning. It's not an end. And identifying the root cause is crucial to making those informed decisions. So there are various methods of conducting root cause analysis. We're going to talk a little bit about two today. One is called the drilling down process. Another is called the 5 whys. There is something called the case in point protocol. It's almost like a fishbowl effect where a problem is presented and people talk about it. And then there's the ORID method, which is a conversational way of looking at the objectives, reflective, interpretive. And it's, there are parts of case in point and ORID in the other two, but each one of them has their own protocol. So Ronald Heifetz from Harvard talks a lot about technical and adaptive challenges. And he says an adaptive challenge is a particular kind of problem solving where the gap cannot be closed by the application of current know-how or routine behavior. In other words, we don't have the answer right now, otherwise we'd be doing it. There's something going wrong with our students, whether it be their scores are declining, ESOL is not doing as well as some of the other groups, etc. And we have tried all the things that we know how to do. We've put in those interventions, etc. But there's still a gap. And so we need to really dig in to find out, well, what is actually causing that? Because if we just look at the surface, we're not going to get to the solution. So one of the things that Dr. Heifetz talks about, again, is this technical versus adaptive. And if you look at the technical box, technical problems are problems that are clear. There's a clear problem. There's a clear solution. The principal can make a decision, or the teacher can make a decision. Sometimes even the secretary can make a decision. And those are not the kinds of things that you would do a root cause analysis. There are many, many problems that arise every day in education, and we can't have a long process with a huge committee for solving all that. However, some problems actually are technical and adaptive. We know what the problem is. We've got to learn a little bit, but the stakeholders have to get together. Something like that might be in an elementary school. How do we decide what to do, when to have outdoor recess? well, we know what the problem is, but we may want to have the principal and the teachers coming together and making a decision, and what do we do when we're not going outside, etc. But an adaptive challenge, it requires learning. We don't even know what the problem is, and we don't therefore know what the solution is, and we have to go to the stakeholders to solve that problem. That's the kind of problem that we want to look at for root cause analysis. A lot of times, staff would like a leader to fix the problem quickly for them. And so it becomes a little dangerous. Heifetz calls it the danger of leadership. The key to identifying whether this student need is an adaptive challenge is whether we know what to do. People who are closest to the problem must be a part of that solution. But sometimes when that happens, it makes people feel that they're getting blamed. And that is part of the leader's charge, is to make this process very open, non-blaming, so that those who have the problem will be able to have their open minds. Because if we're examining why a particular group is not learning, it may be that the teachers don't have the know-how of how to fix that, and it feels uncomfortable to be able to talk about that. So you have to create that very safe environment so people can talk about it.
That's a really tricky thing to do sometimes, and I've found one way, is to be very blunt with the staff members and people involved and put it out there at the start of any meeting, explaining very clearly, like, this is not an I gotcha, this is not a blame game, this is not, something that we're using to evaluate staff, but rather we're all here working together as a team to do what's in the best interest of children. I found that approach kind of allows staff to come into it with more of an open mind and more sensitivity and awareness as well.
Right. Excellent. That's exactly right. And because of what Jeff is saying, this becomes a very equitable tool as well, because often when we're afraid to look at ourselves as the solution, we want to blame, we want to find a quick answer, and we often will look to certain groups. It's their fault. The children aren't succeeding because their parents haven't helped them with their homework. All different arrows pointing outwards rather than being able to look within ourselves. And I think that it's important to constantly be able to do what Jeff just said, to make people understand we're here for the kids. We know we all need to learn. We all need to grow. These problems, if we knew the answers to them, we wouldn't be here. So we need to let ourselves be open to really looking at what's happening. And that's a great point, Jeff. So the classic error is trying to treat these adaptive challenges as a technical problem, coming up with some kind of a very quick answer by looking at data and making a decision of what was causing that. And then what happens is you're solving one of the symptoms, or you're solving the wrong problem altogether. And when you do that, you end up in the end with the same problem. So I have a very fun example of using the 5 whys. Typically, when your challenge is not very complicated, you can use the 5 whys and get to the bottom of what your problem is. And this is a real problem that happened in Washington, D.C., not far from where I work. The Washington Monument, the bottom of the monument in particular, was disintegrating. And the staff felt that that it was happening because they were using harsh chemicals to clean up the Washington Monument. So they did some digging, and they wanted to find out, well, why were they using these harsh chemicals? What was the purpose? And the reason was they were trying to clean off the pigeon poop that had started to build up all around the base of the Washington Monument. But the question arose, well, why are there so many pigeons all of a sudden? What's going on? Well, they found out that the pigeons were there because they like to eat spiders, and there are a lot of spiders on the monument. Again, this was why? What happened? Why are we suddenly getting spiders? So the question is, why are there so many spiders? And they found out that the spiders love to eat gnats, and there were tons of gnats at the base of the Washington Monument. Finally, the last question. So why are there so many gnats? Anybody have any guesses? Do you have a guess, Jeff?
To be honest, I guess maybe it's because of the weather in that area or something, or just that general region of the world. I'm not sure.
Good guess, but not right. Not long before all of this started happening, they were turning on the lights to light up the Washington Monument at dusk because it's so beautiful. But all the gnats were attracted to the lights. And then the gnats were attracting the spiders, and the spiders, it's like one of those children's rhyme. So the solution was they turned on the lights later. And later on, the gnats didn't come about. But it really had nothing to do with the chemicals or the pigeons, etc. But without really digging in a little deeper, they wouldn't have come up with this solution. So you saw the process really is this 5 whys. Peter Senge talks about from MIT, feels that we can look at the bigger picture and see the interrelationship between the issues rather than just picking one item. He also talks a lot about this whole idea of organizations and adaptive capabilities, and one of the ways he does this is using this 5 whys. It's important to know that sometimes you can answer the question in less than 5 whys, and I'm going to give you an example of that. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into some school data. In Montgomery County, they used to have, or actually in Maryland, they used to have a course called in high school the National, State, and Local History course. And at the end of the year, they have an exam. And in one of our high schools, this was the data of the number of students, the percentage of students passing the exam. You can see in 2007, almost 88% were passing, and then by 2009, it was down almost 10 points. So the real question is, what was causing this decline? Let's get to here. So they have declined over the last 3 years. So what are some factors that teachers might say impacted student achievement? And we're going to ask you to give us some examples. Jeff, do you have any ideas of what are some factors that might have caused that decline?
I was just going to chime in with some examples. I was thinking just one thing that teachers may say is just lack of parent support. I think that teachers often look to parents for a lot of support outside of school to follow up on what's being taught in the classroom, and in some cases when students don't have that kind of support outside of school, it's one thing that we do look to and think, well, how can we improve that? But it's definitely something that we recognize as a need to help improve achievement. I would also think that sometimes it's just a matter of saying, well, it's a change in the population of students that we were teaching that year, and that's why test scores have gone down. And there's the possibility maybe whether the population of students that come to us in that year that's being tested have more emotional needs or more learning needs or more behavioral type needs or just other changes in diversity within the group, English language barriers, and lots of different ideas such as that.
Right. You're absolutely right. Those are some things that people actually did say. And our audience is right on point as well. Student population, quality, lower quality early education, taking too much history every year, student motivation, behavior issues that are not taken care of, revision to the standards covered in exams, reading the test, decrease in funding and resources, mobility, lack of reading comprehension skills, social emotional problems, etc. And in fact, let me show you what the teachers did say. Some of them said maybe the student population had changed, there was staff turnover, the class sizes had gone up, some students have not mastered English language, student attendance, students are not learning the curriculum, lack of parental support, there's yours. They said students are not studying enough for the test, students are not doing homework. So what happened in this discussion is that the teachers, after looking at this very large list, similar to what you've just written in the audience, they decided that one of the things that they really all could agree upon were that these particular students were not studying enough for this comprehensive test. And so we did a root cause analysis, or a 5 whys, and I'm not going to click through it, I'm just going to show you. This really was only 4 whys. Why are the test scores declining? They felt that students weren't studying enough for the test. Why aren't they studying enough for the test? Because the review materials, they felt, after doing some investigation, were inadequate. So in other words, as we were studying this issue, they brought some of the information to the table. They brought their work, their syllabus, they brought the review materials, etc. And then the question was, well, why are these review materials suddenly inadequate? And after digging through, they saw that the first semester content was underemphasized. So in other words, this was a 2-semester course, and the first semester and the second semester are tested on the end of the year exam, which is not unusual in high school. But the question was, well, why was it underemphasized in that review packet? The second semester teachers were responsible for the review, and they apparently didn't realize that they needed to include a lot of first semester content, particularly because it had been so long since the students had learned those things. So this is an example in 4 questions how this particular high school staff got to realize, well, why were these test scores? They started with legitimate test scores, but they didn't need any more data. They needed themselves. They needed the people who were in the trenches to look at the material and come up with the reasons. And if this principal had not been like Jeff and had made people feel guilty about it, they may not have admitted what was really happening. Don't you see that, Jeff, how that would have to really be a little embarrassing in a way?
Absolutely. I mean, teachers take things very personally. They put a lot of heart and soul into what they do every day, and so you definitely want to make sure that everyone understands that you're working together and again, not pointing the finger in any one direction.
Correct. And so here's a way that the teachers work together and they solve the problem. A more difficult problem to solve is an overall school data analysis. So I'm going to show you reading and math data from what I'm going to call Orange Grove Elementary School. And it's a real elementary school in Maryland. This is real data from 2010. And I've changed the name of the elementary school, but we're going to use the data to delve into root cause a little bit further. Just so I need to talk to our folks, because what I cannot do is find my pointer. It's not on my little screen.
Ronnie, I think you need to scroll up to the top of the gray area.
I did.
And you should get a lighter
No, it's got a sharing. I've got my little full screen. I don't have the little
arrow?
Mm-mm. All right, well, we'll go on without it. So what you can see in Orange Grove is a bunch of bars They represent each of the subgroups in this particular school. FARM is free and reduced meals. LEP is limited English. Thank you. I see my arrow. This line across represented in 2010 the percentage at which they called it the AMO, the Annual Measurable Objective, that 81.2% of the students in each group would meet proficiency. And so this is showing you the percent of that group that met proficiency. These whiskers are what they call a confidence band. So the smaller the group, the wider the band, because if you have, let's say, 5 students in that band or 3 students in that band, and one of them doesn't succeed, it has huge impact on the data bar. If the bar is small, it means that there are a lot of those students. So just as an example, there probably were only 4, 5, 6 American Indians in this school. That's why this band would be so wide. The hatch mark means that this group met this objective. They give you 1 year because they're just at the bottom of this confidence band. So they were in a watch setting, but basically they were not doing well. And the yellow represents a group that did not make AYP, Annual Yearly Progress, that year. So that's reading. And we're going to quickly look at math. And you can see that the special ed made it just by the skin of their teeth. And in this math, the African American band, they did make AYP. So we're going to look at this data, and we're going to talk about what do the data mean? What is it telling us? So I'm going to move over to this slide and ask Jeff. Jeff, what might you say that the data tells us, and what might it not tell us? And we're going to give you a question, everyone, a question box similar to that. What does it tell us, and what doesn't it tell us?
Okay. Well, when I look at this data, I number one look at the yellow that sort of stands out in the special education population. And I recognize it's the larger whisker line, so there's a larger group of students, and in both cases, both math and reading, the special education students seem to just barely make AYP or aren't making it. So I would want to look at the instruction being provided to those students. Is it modified, or are there accommodations that are appropriate for the students in those groups? What kinds of materials are we using to teach both reading and mathematics? So that's one thing that I would pull from it right away, is that you can tell that they're not making the progress that you'd want to see them make. However, you don't really know the why, so I get to show you why.
Right.
At the same time, you look at the Hispanic population, where you have a large number of students in those groups, and in both cases, they're doing very well. So I'd be curious to see as to why is that. Is it, again, materials being used? Is it other supports that are provided them? Or is it extra supports that they get outside of school? Is it the type of instruction or materials that are used? Going back to the special education population, I wonder, is it an inclusion type setting or an out-of-class type setting? And if it's out of class, is that program running parallel to their grade level general education peers? So I guess I start with a lot of questions there.
Right. Yes. Yes. A lot of times, folks would take some. This is a fairly detailed piece of data. It tells us about our subgroups. It tells how many were proficient. And in some cases, schools will just look at this and develop a school improvement plan based on this data. But it really leads to so many questions. Some of the people in our audience are right on point. Somebody said, well, what is the overlap between the African American population and the special ed? Are they the same students? They're not really enough in the LEP group as a student group, so how many Hispanic students are there? It doesn't tell us about any of the overlaps. And it also, as Jeff suggested, doesn't tell us about interventions. It does, somebody's saying that it looks like a very large farm group, so what's the impact on all of that, et cetera. Yes.
So, I also look at this, and again, going back to kind of helping your staff understand, you want to look at positives as well, and as a school, as a whole school, the all-student group is doing very well in both subject areas. So you'd want to celebrate that at the same time that you want to fine-tune and look for areas that you can get even better.
Right, because we do know that possibly some of these subgroups are very small. In Maryland, unlike some other states, every group 5 and over is counted as a group. So this group, this LEP group, is lower than 5, but we don't know whether the American Indian is 5 or 6, or the special ed could be very small as well. That doesn't dismiss the fact that they need to achieve, but it does help us to understand what do we need to do and how to celebrate the successes. Great point. So an adaptive leader and the drilling down process really does create that climate of safety, and encourages this growth and not guilt. And it allows staff to share their struggles. It gives them a time when they have a non-defensive self-examination, as we were talking about before. And then, just as Jeff was saying, it encourages the stories about success, too. So we can look at things both in the positive and in the negative. And it really helps staff to see the huge impact their practice has on their work. So the root cause, as we talked about, is the most basic underlying specific reason for the presence of an effect or a result. And it's questioning that really helps us to find where we're going. So the drilling down process starts with those summative results that we just looked at. And we can identify a student achievement need. In that particular case, you have to say that the need looks like it's in special education and possibly in African American in the reading band. But why? What is that need? What do we need to do? So we form a team, and in our case it's a leadership team, to ask questions about what more you want to know. Because just looking at that data, we really have a lot of questions. And we collect that data once you ask those multiple questions. And Jeff alluded to this before. He said, so they break up into teams and they find more information and they bring that back and it helps them to write their improvement plan. So once you deploy your staff, you discuss the findings. It's called findings. These are the answers to our original questions. And we have to look at those findings and see, are they root causes or do we need to go back and ask more questions? And then you can create the team's improvement plan based on that root cause. So if we go back to the original two charts, what are some questions that you might ask to understand why the special ed and the African American students on these two charts are the ones that we may need to help? And Jeff gave us a couple of questions. Are the interventions being deployed with fidelity? So that's one question. So that's an example. So what are some other questions, everyone, that you might be asking?
That the teachers would be asking.
Yes, that the teachers and the rest of the team, it could be parents, it could be paraeducators, we're looking at the data as a leadership team, let's say, or as a school improvement team, and we're looking at this data, but it really doesn't give us all the answers. It just tells us that those two groups didn't do as well as the others. So what are the questions that we may want to be asking? So Garvin is saying, are there remedial needs that students have in subjects? Susan said, can results be broken down by grade level and classroom? Yes, it can be broken down to the individual level. Where are students with disabilities receiving their instruction, in the general ed classroom or is in a pullout? What is the baseline reading level? How are the grade levels doing for each group? What levels are included in this data? How is previous data being used to drive instruction? That's a really good question. Can results be broken down by item and standard? How many students are in each subgroup? How is progress monitored and interventions? Have the special education students' IEP been written and implemented to truly meet the students' needs? That's a really good question. Is there student mobility? Are there RTI groups targeting students with higher needs? Is there co-teaching model, etc.? Excellent, excellent questions. And those are the kinds of things that you can all ask. And interestingly, most of the answers to your questions can be answered by the people sitting around the table. And if they can't answer them, they can go back out, they can look at further data, they can ask their colleagues. It doesn't require more testing, gathering more testing data. It really is going out and looking for the answers to these questions. So some of the questions that I had written down were, do the students receive their accommodations? Do they understand the content? Is their reading ability affecting their ability to succeed in math? Do parents help with homework? What interventions do they receive? Are students receiving on grade level instruction? And what we do is we deploy staff to look for these answers, and then we reconvene, just like Jeff suggested. And then when we get findings, when we get the answers to these questions, we use something that's called an interrelationship diagram to really hone down into the base of the root cause. And I'll be showing you the interrelationship diagram in a little while. I want to remind you that we often have to remind staff that data are observations or facts, which when collected, organized, and evaluated become information or knowledge. Again, it doesn't have to be more testing data. It really has to be the answers to the questions, the kinds of questions you were asking and the kinds of questions that all good teachers would ask when they're looking at at that data. So it's very important to examine data collaboratively because, again, it reduces those hunches and replaces bandwagon approach with a cause and effect process. It aligns analysis with the desired results, and it allows many voices to be heard. We then can identify root causes because of this process. And then we can direct the allocation of resources where it belongs. It really does build that professional learning community because you're looking at data and coming up with solutions. An example of reducing this hunch idea is I was asked to help a middle school a few years ago whose math data in their 7th grade had drastically gone down. And the leadership had gotten together, and first of all, I was very surprised that most of the people who were assembled had really not seen their own data. And so that was the first thing we did, really to look at it. And we talked about, just like Jeff had suggested, this is not a blaming game. We're really going to delve deep and try to solve these problems. But when I looked at the data, we also looked at the trend. So we looked at the year before. How did the 6th graders do on their math that we were now looking at in 7th grade? And the 6th graders had done much, much better. Fortunately, around the table, there was a 6th grade team leader, and I said, well, what was happening last year that these same students, it was particularly their Hispanic students in this particular middle school. And she said, well, they really felt that what made a very big impact was their after-school, I guess, just resource work, intervention group that they encouraged their students to come to. and after much root cause analysis and everything, we did find out that this year, the year I was there, they did have an after-school program for their 7th grade boys, their Hispanic boys. But they were saying, well, but they're not going. And the reason was that they came up with is that these students had to go home and help their families, which was a very pointed, inaccurate discussion. And it came out after we did much more digging that, yes, they did have their intervention after school, but another teacher in the school was running a program simultaneously to take 7th grade students to the University of Maryland to see how the university works and to go into their cafeteria and see their classrooms. And their field trips to different universities in our area were on the same day at the same time as the intervention group. And I asked them, I said, do you think if you had the choice of going to math tutoring or going on a great trip to the universities, which would you choose? And in the end, it really had nothing to do with their original hunch, that it had to do with children having to go home rather than coming to intervention. So by getting together, it was a much more equitable look at what was happening. The teachers were talking to each other. Particularly in secondary schools, often different teams don't really have time to get together and discuss data with each other. And it was, I think, an eye-opener for them.
Ronnie, I have a question.
Yes.
So this idea of a hunch versus a root cause. So how do you know you've achieved that you've gotten to a root cause versus you're still at the hunch level?
Right.
Because it seems that, okay, they have to take care of their families. That seems very plausible. How do you know you need to dig more?
Well, by asking more questions, how many of the students are actually going home? And going back to almost the 5 whys, if you will. Why are they going, or are they actually going home? And maybe having to go back and survey those students and see, are they going home? Well, they weren't going home. They were going on a field trip. So that's how, it's just by asking more and more questions. They say that you get to the root cause when you can't ask any more questions.
And pulling in additional data if needed, like
are
they actually? Mm-hmm.
Exactly, and going back and getting more data.
Thank you.
So, oh, you're welcome. So in a nutshell, going back to the Orange Grove example, the data were insufficient, and these data did not indicate a root cause. We have no idea why those students are not doing well. So creating a school improvement plan that helps, let's say, that special education group without knowing why they weren't doing well, you may not hit the right problem. It could be, as Jeff suggested, are they getting their interventions? It could be, somebody said something about, are the teachers using their IEPs correctly, etc. So just looking at that group and creating a plan without really discussing why it's happening, you don't get to the bottom. So again, the root cause is that basic underlying specific reason for the presence of an effect or a result. And a cause always has causes and effect. And causes determine the effect, and to change the effect, you have to change the cause. So the data must be used to discover what's causing this problem. And again, we mobilize the team. We have we identify stakeholders who are closest to the student achievement need and or have relevant information. So that might be students, it could be it should be the teachers, it could be of course the principal. As I said, we include paraeducators who do a lot of our interventions. And you convene this group to clarify the issues. And then an adaptive leader calls this mobilizing the stakeholders. That's a term that HIFITS uses.
And I think an important part there. Can I just add something?
Of course.
I just wanted to say, when you start to really analyze that data and you're asking those questions, often when you're talking about student achievement, too, you want to look at the learning experiences that students are being exposed to and how they're being assessed. So in those teams, when you're getting together and really involving everybody, bringing those materials so that you're reviewing some of that together is a great way to really get to the answers, because you can get answers to questions, but it's also nice to see some information that kind of supports those answers.
Correct. Like we talked about with the NSL example, they brought that those materials from their review sessions at the end of the semester, and they could clearly see then that they were inadequate.
Right.
They may not have been able to know that without really examining that carefully.
Right. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there. It's more than just bringing a group of people together to talk about problems and ask questions, but also bring supporting data to review together and examine.
Right. Good point. So the drilling down process is, again, we start with these summative results similar to the bar chart we looked at. You form a team to ask questions about what more you want to know about that data, and then they deploy and collect data from multiple sources to answer the questions. And as I said, sometimes you can answer the questions right there. Excuse me. Then you discuss the data to determine the findings, and then decide if the findings are root causes, and you create the team's plan based on the root cause. I want to show you a graphic of this process. So, excuse me, you start with the student need, you develop the questions, you collect data, you get some findings, and is this the root cause? Is it the bottom line? Sorry. If it is, then you can start finding some solutions. If it's not, you might have to go back and ask some more questions. And that goes back to Teresa's question. If you can keep asking questions about it, it's probably you're not at the finding, at the root cause level yet.
Ronnie and Jeff, can you say a little bit more about how often you do this at your school? Do you do this during a professional development day? Do you, one of our participants, Joe Wolf, says that they use RCA at the end of each quarter. So how often do you use this, and how long does it take? Do you take a whole day? Do you take a couple of days?
Yeah, depending on the problem will really depend on how long it takes. But we have some leadership time. One is at the beginning of the summer, or really the end of the year, I would say. And teachers come usually the last day of school or the right before school is over. And it's a full day. We really delve into all kinds of data. They bring evidence, just as Jeff has suggested. And I'll show you what we do with our stickies and our questions. It takes a few hours, and then even after that, maybe reducing down to the root cause, because sometimes what happens is you come to several, what we might call several root causes, but often they're weighted. One causes the other. I'll give you an example. Last year, we found that students really had trouble deconstructing the questions to the test because they needed to build their reading skills, but we also saw that they needed to increase understanding of vocabulary. So which causes which? Is it that they don't know vocabulary and so they can't deconstruct the question? Or are they not, et cetera? So which comes first, the chicken or the egg? And so we had to really see, we had to weigh those out. Then during the summer, the leadership comes back and helps to write the school improvement plan. Our leadership gets 3 summer days. And we do other things besides just root cause analysis, but a lot of it has to do with school improvement planning. And then in the middle of the year, we look at the school improvement plan and see how we're doing. Part of the school improvement plan, our action plan, what are the actual things we're going to do to hit these problems, and are the actions working, and do we need to tweak this? And periodically we also look at how are our interventions going. We have data chats with the teachers to see how the individual teachers are doing, the individual students are doing. So we're looking at documents of intervention and how each little group is doing, how individual children are doing, to see, are we getting closer? So that was my process.
Sure. I can share mine as well. We usually start gathering information in the second half of a school year to start preparing our school improvement plan for the following school year. So we'll use, we do use a little bit of release team or time for that team that actually will get together to analyze the data and come together to formalize our goals and things for the following school year based on what the root cause of the problem may be. And then we share it out with the staff and we put it into writing through faculty meetings, but we constantly revisit throughout the school year then. Once we have those goals that we start the year with, we're revisiting on a regular basis through faculty meetings, team planning meetings, and we definitely do more of an extensive review kind of mid-year to see how we're doing with our goals and what changes we might have identified or positive other challenges that might have come up as a result of some of our investigating and looking at the data. And then the team forms again to start planning for the following school year. So there's definitely a time component. I think that's one thing that everybody knows. We need more of. You always want more time. But we put the time into it because it really does make a positive difference. It's definitely worth that time that we put into it.
You know, I noticed that Kathy Dyer is saying that deep conversations like this should occur when fresh data are available, and I absolutely agree. They don't have to be a definite root cause analysis, though. We do examine student data all the time. As I said, monthly we have data chats with the teachers to see how the students who we're targeting are really doing. So then we can see, are some of our interventions, are our ideas working? And then we move on from there. We're assuming that we're solving the right problem during this time. If we start to see that things are not going, then we can really take another look at it. So we need to ask this team to think about the identified student achievement need. What do you want to know about it? So going back again to that data that we saw earlier. And when you're sitting around as the team, this is a process I developed. You have each person write questions on a sticky note, a separate sticky note, each question, the kinds of questions you wrote before, the kinds of questions that Jeff was asking. And we use this. I put, it doesn't look like this necessarily on the wall, but I have 4 large chart papers on the wall. One says student achievement, one says instructional quality, one says school capacity, and one says school policies, programs, and procedures. Here's where I think you can get a lot of bang for your buck with your teachers, because I think this is where you can say not all student needs are caused by a lack of instruction. Sometimes it's a capacity issue. Maybe we need more professional development. Sometimes it's a school policy or programs issue, and the principal needs to set time aside for staff to get together to examine writing and to do group scoring so that they see whether their interventions are working. It could be instructional quality, and it could be that students that under question need more interventions. So as they ask their questions, they put them under these boxes. So we start to see where are the fixes needed? What are the things that we need to do? And it doesn't always fall on the teacher. Sometimes we need, as I said, more staff development. it's a very powerful way of having everyone asking questions and putting them into these boxes that helps us when we're developing a plan. And the framework for data collection is simply a structure to use with this process. And it's just a very visual way of seeing where are the questions and what do we need to answer. Going back to it, sometimes what I'll do is then I'll ask several people to find the answers to the questions that are written under instructional quality, and another group might be doing school policy, etc. So it's a way for everyone to collaboratively answer all these questions. Some sample questions that might go under each of those categories. Under the student achievement one is, what are the concepts and skills in which each individual student is deficient? Going back to a question that was asked before, can we delve into the student data? And we can absolutely do that. Assessment might be, how is formative assessment used diagnostically for reteaching? Are the teachers giving frequent formative assessments? Programs could be, how effective is the current program for reading intervention? Do we need to look at other programs? What evidence do we have that reteaching is a regular practice is an instructional question. And school capacity, is staff knowledge sufficient, or do we need staff development to solve the student achievement problem? So it's a very good way of asking some questions. After last year, we found that we still saw students struggling with writing. And we decided to survey the students about what made writing so hard for them. And we found out that they had very similar answers all across the school. They talked about how hard it was to remember the stories, and then they had to answer the questions, despite the fact that the teachers had taught them to go back into the text and find text-dependent questions. They still were feeling that they needed to memorize. They talked about how tired they got if something was a long passage. And we know that the new park is coming up and it's going to have very long passages. So we added perseverance and teaching the students about going back into the text as part of our school improvement plan. So findings are statements of information that are gleaned from discussing the data. The staff is given time to answer the questions, and they describe the current state. The findings are not assumptions. They do not jump to conclusions, and they're still not talking about interventions. And a word of caution, when you do root cause analysis with most really great educators, everybody wants to suggest how to make a fix, because we all want to take care of our students. So you have to keep talking about, is that a finding or is that a solution? Because you really want to find out what's the problem and then come up with solutions. So again, you create that plan. The root causes, don't blame. There's no further questions that we can ask. And in our professional opinion, as a group, the cause appear to be accurate. Just like Teresa started, this isn't statistical analysis. We're still educators looking at real live data of real live students. The causes are important and worth our effort. Now, sometimes we'll come up with problems that are real, but we can't fix them. So if we know that many of our students come from homes where parents are working 3-4 jobs, that's not something we can fix. We can provide student support to help. So we have to work on things that we can work on. We can address root causes, and we can address many, but not all root causes. Don't try too many at one time.
Ronnie, before you go on, Elizabeth Drame has a great question here. I'm just going to click back to that previous slide where you make the point of we can address many but not all root causes. Well, what if those root causes are deeply held beliefs, for example, on the teacher's part, low expectations, various set, maybe biases and so forth. How can we get to those, and how would we be able to reveal those as root causes?
Right.
Those are a little more challenging to unveil.
They are. There's a lot of really great literature about looking at equitable practices and trying to help people to see that our expectations are so important. And often in a school, children are not just in one classroom all day. Sometimes we can look at specific kids and see if they're succeeding in other realms, other ways, perhaps in art or music. We can look at their achievement in another teacher's class of previous year. Having high expectations really is a belief, and as a leader, you really have to try to do professional development about that and really make comparisons of how low expectations affect the outcome so clearly. Maybe book study really helps. Looking at some very good literature about that very issue as maybe with the leadership team, or maybe as buying the whole staff a really great book on the topic, having them read it over the summer and having discussions in the beginning during pre-service. That's a really fun way to get everybody to have some of the same information. We read Mindset this summer. It's not the same topic, but it does have to do with expectations. And I bought everyone on the staff Mindset, including our paraeducators, and I gave them some questions to answer, well, really to think about as they read. And then during pre-service, we did all sorts of really exciting different workshop ideas using Mindset. And as a matter of fact, we're going to revisit it probably right after Thanksgiving. And it became one of the goals on our chart was really to use inspirational stories about successful people who struggled to help the students with perseverance and motivation. And we're going to really explore Mindset in the classroom, which really deals with feedback and giving constructive, positive feedback and the effect that has, rather than just putting a star or, great job or bad job. Helping students to improve, giving them another chance to fix their work, etc. So that's a long answer, but it's a whole topic of discussion that really has to happen. It also needs to be, one of the things I did in a former school is my evaluation and observation process revolved around those issues. And so we did staff development about high expectations and equitable practices. And then we worked on, well, what would be some of the look-fors in the classroom to know that this is happening? And I used them in my informal observations and in my formal observations. And, somebody who really is not on board really can't do well in my school.
I would agree with that. And I would just add to that, you really do kind of identify those staff members who are maybe not setting the expectation or the bar as high as it needs to be for students, or as high as students can handle to reach their full potential. And it's somewhat on an individual basis. You typically don't have a whole staff of people doing that same thing. It's usually one or two people that you can address separately on their own.
Have them go and observe another teacher. sometimes in order to help a child, because we don't want to wait for the whole year while this person's learning to change their mind, if at all, sometimes you might suggest and work with the team to redo some groups. Some flexible grouping is always a good idea. And so perhaps the lower students or the students in question might go to a different teacher for their reading group, for instance, and then come back to their homeroom. And so they get another person working with them. Often that is a very interesting way of looking at data again, because if the student starts to achieve, the team could talk about it, and you might be able to lead that discussion. So I hope that answers the question.
I think that, and I was just typing this out to respond to Elizabeth, because she said she was more, her question was really more focused on the types of data that might reveal those expectations and potential biases as root causes. And I was going to say to her that, well, that's really hard to get at because people are aware of, for example, if you try to administer a survey trying to get at that, they might respond in socially desirable ways. And so this might be something that you might just have to root out as with individual conversations and sort of observing the teachers and so on to see if there are sort of biases or differential expectations and treatment that are going on. There was another question.
The interesting thing, Teresa, is that you would be sometimes surprised what people will say when their guard is down, and it gives you a very good insight into what they're feeling. And for instance, my example of the middle school, I know that they were thinking that Hispanics boys have to go home and babysit, and that's sort of a stereotypical look, and I think that was a problem. But on the other hand, it was their way of trying to make sense out of why did this suddenly change, but it was uncovering some biases there, and I was a little taken aback by it.
Yeah.
But it was easy to then ask some more questions and find out, well, that really doesn't hold up. So somebody did ask me if offline, if I can later on share some of the workshop ideas we did with Mindset, and I'll be happy to do that later.
Thank you. And actually there was a question about, well, what if you identify a root cause, but they're not particularly thrilled with that answer? What do you do in the case of an unpopular or not well-received root cause?
Wow, that hasn't happened to me, because I think that for the most part, educators come to school wanting to do the best they can. And I think when we get to the root cause, because it's been so collaborative, most of the time people are pretty excited. They're like, wow, okay, so how can we fix this? And they're happy to get to, let's get there. So I haven't had a time when people were not happy, or at least they didn't share that with me.
Jeff,
have you, Jeff?
No, I'm sorry, I haven't. I wish I could give you an example of something like that, but I haven't either. I would agree that, when you really pull a team together and they really look at the data and they're really looking for what could be causing this situation, they are very excited to find what it could be and more focused on what can we do to change it.
As a matter of fact, as I said before, so often the educators really want to make suggestions. Why don't we try this? Why don't we try that? And it's just like keeping the horses in the gate, because they just want to get to what can I do? And that really is a testament to teachers wanting to do the right thing for their kids.
Absolutely.
So as we talked about, one of the things that you sometimes have to do, and we were alluding to that a minute ago, is we have to narrow these root causes. and the teams take turns, the ones that were deployed, to get the answers, and they come back with some root causes that are identified. And we can make what's called an interrelationship diagram. It's used to focus the decision and determine if one cause has an impact on the other, and it's a forced choice exercise. So I'll show you a little bit about what that might look like. So suppose we come up with 5 possible causes, and then we say to the whole group, did A cause B? Did A cause B? Or did B cause A? And let's say they say A. It doesn't, you know, we can't say what they're going to say, but let's say that we do that. Then we say, okay, did A cause C, or did C cause A? Did A cause D, or did D cause A? Did A cause E, or did E cause A? And then we start all again, and we say, what about B? Did B cause C, or did C cause B? And we go all around till we're all done. When you don't put all those arrows, you just put an arrow from the one that caused the other. And like I said, we thought that students were not understanding the directions to the test and not understanding all of the text because they were lacking in some vocabulary. So one caused the other. And as you go around the circle, you find that there's 1 or 2 that caused everything rather than everything being equal. So you put weight on all of these different decisions or all of these different findings. And the benefits, again, are your staff it's consistent with the tenets of a professional learning community. It encourages staff to take advantage of the knowledge and talent of all the staff. So you get different opinions, different ideas from different places in the building. And the entire team works together to ask the questions, to research and diagnose the root causes, and prescribe new practices that will help. And here's the big rocks. You have to do data analysis, of course, for sustainable school improvement. And an equitable leader needs to use teams of staff who are closest to the student achievement to collaboratively look. And then we dig deeply. It takes time. Actually, Teresa, you asked me about time. It could take several hours to even just come up with the questions, and then a little bit of more time, whether it be you can look for answers, coming back and doing it another couple of hours to do the interrelationship diagram, and then it takes time to write a school improvement plan.
We had a question from John Summers on how do you decide on the right thing to do?
Well, as I said, going back to that force field to this diagram, when you figure out here are all the findings that we came up with, when you're done asking these questions, did A cause B or did B cause A, you start to see, well, everything's really pointing to A, or everything's really pointing to A and D. And if we were to fix those 2 things, I think that E would be taken care of and C would be taken care of, and so would B. So that's how you decide. Do we know it's right? Of course not. That's why you have to visit briefly all through the year and look at how the students are doing, re-look at your school improvement plan, look at your data. This is a people problem, and unfortunately there's often not a simple solution, but you get so much closer to the cause of the problem rather than just saying it's a reading problem. You get down to, okay, we need to help them with some academic vocabulary, help them to get back into the text, and use sticky notes and highlighters, and understand that you don't have to memorize a text. You know, some very down and dirty answers to the question of why are some students not succeeding in writing for us. It's not just, okay, they can't read, because that's not the answer. So that by using this interrelationship diagram, it weights the answers or the findings that the staff has come up with.
And also, as far as how you decide on the right thing to do, it is somewhat, I mean, that's why you constantly revisit to kind of see how are we doing, how are things going, do we need to change what we're doing to, you know, to satisfy the need of the root cause.
Right. One of the things that was interesting when I joined this staff 4 years ago was there were lots of interventions being done, but when I asked, how do you know if they worked, there wasn't an answer. And so that's why you do, just like Jeff was saying, you have to revisit it. We're now doing, we have an online document of intervention, and the paraeducators who are doing the interventions every couple of weeks are indicating is there improvement, and using data. And by data, I mean if it's an intervention on a very young child who doesn't know their letters yet, you know, have they learned their letters, etc. So then you know if the over time, after a few weeks, if that intervention isn't working, then we have to try something else rather than waiting even till the end of second quarter to say, well, you know, Joe still doesn't know his letters. Well, that's too late. We really need to get busy on that. So it's really digging into the individual data as well during the year. I did want to go over this last big rock that I think is so important, and it goes back to the question that was asked a few minutes ago, and that is that equitable leaders understand that finding the root cause is an adaptive challenge, and it often involves loss, changing beliefs, and new learning. So those folks who have the belief that students can achieve, they have to change and they have to find new ways, and that involves bringing in support from other teachers, observing teachers, doing observations, etc. And so it's a collaborative process, and it's an equitable process. So I guess my final question is, as a result of today's webinar, what action might you plan to take? What action step? And I'm going to start with Jeff. Jeff is very experienced in this process and probably could be teaching this webinar. But by the way, Jeff, thank you so much for helping me today.
No problem.
And what might you do a little bit differently? I know this is your second time listening, and I know you do so many wonderful things.
I guess what I'd like to do is really look at our team of who makes up our team that reviews the data and things. We've grown a lot as a staff over the last couple of years, so we have a lot of new staff members, and I want to make sure that we're equally represented in a lot of the areas and including a lot of the newer staff members as well. I mean, we do include many different stakeholders, from community members to students and staff. And when we look at our staff, we do include people from different areas, you know, the special area teachers, the teachers, the upper grade, lower grade, and so forth. But I really want to have both veteran teachers as well as newer teachers, and really start to kind of grow that.
I think that's a great idea, and one of the reasons for it is that, remember, you always want to have all these different voices joining you. And a new teacher comes in with fresh eyes. Sometimes, as you know, in everything in life, you know, if you've always done it the way you've done it, you know, this is the way we do things here, so to speak. And a lot of times teachers get into a habit of this is the way we do this. Whereas a young teacher may come in from their student teaching experience or having done some work in the university on a particular topic, and they come in with fresh eyes and some great ideas. And we can't assume that they wouldn't be able to look at this problem and come up with some ideas. So that's
and I also like the idea that you mentioned earlier about how through the root cause analysis and the process, you sort of identify different staff strengths and things. And I want to do more with what strengths are identified as sort of turnkey, and using the data in other ways as well to turnkey that information to other staff members and, you know, create other PLCs.
Excellent. So there's some excellent ideas here of things that people want to do. It complements the data retreat 5-step process, especially the 5 whys and the adaptive versus technical problems. Somebody was interested in the overlapping causes diagram, and might try some of that with their classes. You teach future administrators, yes, and I taught future administrators and used that with them, and it really was a powerful tool. Build capacity by turnkeying this information during inquiry teacher team meetings. 5 Whys with the districts. Lots of great ideas.
Actually, Linda, rather than closing out the poll, can you make the box smaller and just keep it up there, because I see that multiple attendees are still typing, and so I'd like to keep that up as we move forward. I want to be careful about the time. I realize now it's 5:30, so I just want to wrap this up. Great discussions, great back and forth. I don't think we don't have any more time for questions and answers, but what I'd like to do is invite the attendees to contact Ronnie if you have specific questions that you'd like to direct to her privately. But we also have a forum for this particular topic, and so we invite you to ask additional questions there. We will post the FAQs from the previous webinar, as well as questions and suggestions and resources that have emerged during this webinar. So those are a couple of carrots to hopefully tempt you to come and visit our website and go to this forum. I think we've got a lot of great comments and great ideas, and I really want to thank Ronnie and Jeff for being such tremendous presenters. I think that their schools are very lucky to have them as instructional leaders. I don't think they're typical in their orientation towards data and really thinking about taking this approach, which is very thoughtful and data-driven inquiry as a form of school improvement is something that I think is so important, and I think they are great illustrations of that approach. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
it
you
was
very
a
much.
pleasure, and I really wanted to thank the participants. This group was really great in answering our questions and having lots of great information to share, so I really appreciate all your participation.
Yeah, lots of great ideas out there. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for having me, Ronnie. It was great.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks.
And again, we've got resources to download over on the right-hand side. We also would like to invite you to upcoming webinars, and you can register for those on the REL Mid-Atlantic website. And yes, this particular webinar recording will be archived and will be available within the next day or two on our website. And so I'd like to please ask you to take a minute to complete our feedback survey. We do take your comments very seriously, and it helps us improve and refine the quality of our offerings. So if you would please fill out the evaluation, we would be very grateful.
Just
and
as
yes,
a reminder, the evaluation is on the bottom left-hand side of your screen, and you click on evaluation.
Yeah, just click on evaluation. Your browser might block the pop-up, and so you might want to click it again and go to it directly. And yes, the action steps, all the information from the question boxes will be captured and will be part of the archive. So thank you very much. Thanks again, everybody, and we hope to see you again at a future webinar by REL Mid-Atlantic.